don't take anything for granted of what you think the future is going to look like, and be nimble.
Welcome back, Ecom Logistics Nation. Today's guest is someone who's been right at the center of how parcel logistics is evolving. Scott Ashbaugh, Chief Commercial Officer at DHL eCommerce Americas. Scott's been with DHL for over 16 years. He's scaled operations, led automation rollouts, and helped shape how millions of parcels get delivered every day across the U.S. From testing robotic sortation in Atlanta to navigating USPS reform. This guy has seen and done it all. We'll unpack how his team's staying ahead while the industry keeps shifting under our feet. Scott, great to have you on the show.
Dan and Nod, good to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Scott, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation.
Before we dive into all that fun stuff, we'll rewind a bit. Scott, you started out in industrial design. You went to school for industrial engineering, then went into consulting. Now you're leading commercial strategy at one of the largest e-commerce transportation networks in the world. So would love to hear from you how that diverse background and those experiences have influenced how you look at building commercial strategy and leading a sales organization team.
It may be all the way back to industrial design. It's a very creative discipline. In the School of Architecture, people who design cars and all kinds of stuff do industrial design background. It's a very innovative product development specialty. I've taken a lot of what they call design thinking. Don't just get pigeonholed into the most obvious one too quickly. And that's sort of like curiosity of what's another way to do it? What's another way to do it has followed me all the way through for consulting operations, certainly now in the commercial world. And in the consulting world, a lot about structure, looking at things broadly and being able to organize work. That's taken me a long way. Very diverse experience with the DHL consulting group. Then thrown into operations, went into the DHL eCommerce. We have an export business, about 10% of the overall business. When I joined, that export group was in dire straits. Quality was terrible. I was losing money. And they say, hey, let this guy take one crack at turning around. So I got a chance to go at it with a machete and made a lot of vast change, and it ended up working. As a result, I got a chance at running the domestic operation, which was 10 times the size. Didn't know really anything about it. So I had to bring on a veteran team and build that up just before COVID. Then we had to take the entire group through COVID's 19 hubs, got through that, grew the business, expanded. That's where all the automation took place because like all of us in the industry, we have more volume than we know what to do with. We need to expand. So everybody put their chips down and bought real estate automation. I think we were smart about how we did that, and that served us well. And then I got an opportunity to jump to the other side of the house and see what it's like on the sales side. All the operators think they're just drinking wine and eating steaks. I was curious what goes on that side of the house. It's a really fascinating side of the business. That's been an amazing ride for the last year and a half or so, and here I am.
That's an awesome background, Scott. I work with a lot of 3PLs and a lot of 3PLs that are growing their commercial team. And I always lean into look at who you have in your company already. Look for someone who's on the floor or involved in tech that you think could be commercial facing or has a desire to go into the commercial side. When you could bring that empathy and that experience and that knowledge to the commercial side, it just resonates internally and externally tremendously is what I found.
Yeah, it's been an easy transition for me. Coming from the operations background, most our clients are operators. I'm very familiar with the challenges that they face. Certainly a bit of a different dynamic than ours, but same kind of issues. I'm on the floor talking to them about what they're doing to retain their people. I think it's a different conversation than they're used to. So that's been a great transition. And then at the same time, I know inside, outside, up, down the operation and what it costs to do things. And so when they want to talk about doing something creative, I have a pretty good idea of what's possible, what's not.
Amazing. Let's start with the broad topic of everything going on USPS. They've announced their $40 billion modernization plan, which is one of the biggest shifts that they've had in years or decades. New sortation centers, EVs, route consolidations, and now just last week, the announcement of a new Postmaster General. So just curious, what does that mean for companies like DHL? And then maybe the follow-up is, what does that mean for shippers? I would love your perspective on how you think about that and how you guys are discussing all this internally and planning for it. And then what should the outside world be doing the same?
David Steiner, the new named PMG. I think no one has a great read on what his intentions are or how he would address challenges at the USPS. So we're all wondering what's the plan there. Step back with the Louis DeJoy and company. You got to give that guy credit for making an honest effort to try to change something. In an organization that big with that many stakeholders, and you got to take 10 steps forward, knowing you're going to get beat up 9 steps backward just to get one forward. So you got to give him credit for really trying. And I think a lot of the thought that went into what he was trying to do made sense from our perspective as a workshare partner. A lot of the things he did on the surface weren't great for us. So they eliminated the ounce-based pricing under a pound. They backed us up to the SCF as opposed to the DDU. But when you look at a DDU, for example, which is a destination delivery unit, like your local post office, that was great for us because huge barrier to entry, right? We were going to 10,000 DDUs every day. And you got to have scale and quite a sophisticated operation to get there. So pulling us back one step to maybe about 200 entry locations is maybe a little easier to replicate, but you still have to have quite a bit of scale to get there. You look at the DDUs, and in the past, how many trucks were going to the DDU? You have ours. Back in the day, there was FedEx, UPS-MI, Pitney Bowes, the USPS themselves, Amazon, 6 trucks going to every DDU. Is that really necessary? And you zoom out and say, for the sake of carbon efficiency in the world and the need for optimization in general, I get it. Like, it makes sense to commingle that stuff early and only have a very small amount of trucks going to all those DDUs. There's a lot of them. So from a lot of this perspective, as painful it was at the onset, some of it makes sense in the grand world. And then we just need to adapt to make it work for us. We spent a lot of time, and we've got a tremendous relationship with the USPS, and they've helped us every step of the way to be successful, which we have. So I can't credit that team enough for listening to us, working with us to make the turn.
What I find really interesting is where you said they pulled us back. Whenever that news came out, it seemed like everyone knew something was going to go down. And then you heard the news, the September-ish timeframe last year that they are executing on that one pullback. There was a freak out moment. I love hearing that. You're like, that's a good thing. At the end of the day, from a network standpoint, as long as you have scale, that's a good thing. That's a really interesting aspect. I didn't look at it that way because there was a cost implication, but then there is the offset implication as well at the same time. Right?
For sure. Being very reactive, you just don't want change. We don't like it, but that's not the case. I try to look at it holistically in terms of a package needs to go from A to B. You don't need 6 trucks going to tens of thousands of DDUs every day. It's a bit much. Now, there are some cases where there are huge ones and there's a lot of density, and maybe some of that does make sense in the future. I don't want to preclude that, but to have 6 trucks going to North Arkansas, maybe not.
And look, the new Postmaster General comes with a little background as well, more so from a commercial perspective. Who knows? There could be some changes coming, things that you would not think would rapidly change. One administration does something and then kind of flip around. Who knows at this point, right? What's going to end up happening? Maybe by the end of the summer, we might see some sort of change. And I'm pretty sure there is lobbying, there is conversations that are going on to keep it. There is that context around collaborate versus compete from a network standpoint. That's always going to stay true. It's definitely interesting. If you switch over to the retailer side, the folks that you speak to on the diversification front, what is the message that you have for retailers as they are looking at, do I stick with what I have? Do I diversify? Where should I be going? If they exist as a customer, they are saying, okay, should I shift? Or if they are a USPS customer saying, look, there is a diversification, why our network brings what it brings. Like, what's that messaging like out of curiosity?
Sure. It depends a lot on your profile, right? As a shipper, how big are you? How many packages do you have? How much can you warrant? The same thing in reverse, having multiple carriers come to your dock, right? Because you want to split it out to multiple carriers. If you got 20,000 packages a day, you can probably afford to have multiple trucks showing up, even if it was one carrier. And in the same token, how far are you from the first hub? Are you in a dense metro area? You're in New Jersey, New York. That truck's not going to have to go very far with 3 or 4 carriers worth of volume to the hubs. If you're out in the middle of nowhere, and you have different carrier trucks showing up and doing a 200-mile run to a hub, that's a lot more costly. So it really depends on your positioning and what you need. In some cases, maybe USPS is perfectly fine. If you're a 2-ounce shipper in the current world, USPS Ground Advantage is the way to go. Those guys are dominating that space. And for us, like we're now specializing 1 to, let's say, 8 pounds, probably where we're the most cost effective, and have 3 different service levels. And I think that's useful for a lot of carriers where merchants where if you need something flown from Orlando to Seattle, that's what we do. It's kind of how diverse are your needs and how cost effective is it to split it up, both from a pickup standpoint, but also in your facility, do you have the sorts to be able to segregate out that much?
That makes complete sense. And I think in that same terms, right, it's not just USPS today, right, Scott? There is so much competition starting to evolve in first mile, middle mile, last mile. You have pressures coming from last mile providers that came out of the woodworks, I would say, to a certain degree over the last few years. I guess the after effects of pandemic and the evolution of some of the network that ended up happening, as well as on the first mile side, right? The middle mile is still growing, and that's where you have the strength because it requires capital and investment. Do you see from a topology standpoint or network topology standpoint changes in how you think about that middle mile as competitive advantage and network and automation? How do you keep a perspective on that? And what is DHL doing today around that space?
Yeah, certainly our expertise in terms of what we own ourselves and do ourselves is that middle mile. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars building out that network and have the scale to keep it full. That gives us quite an advantage in many cases. So we've been a dedicated partner to the USPS for 20 years for the last mile, and that's served us very well. We have no intention to change that unless something dramatic changes. I know you're talking about middle mile, but speaking of the last mile for a second, that USPS truck is going to every house every day, no matter what. Same story as the DDUs, right? Just struggle to see how it's going to be in the long run more cost effective to put a new truck or car or person's personal vehicle on the road to your address to deliver a package when there's already a truck there. So that's a bit of our philosophy right now of what makes most sense. And so we stick with that. Now having the scale to operate flights coast to coast and 18 hubs to feed that network and inject those parcels quickly into your local USPS delivery vehicle, critical. Because if anybody could do what we do in the middle mile, those contracts are open. Anybody can get a parcel select contract and do what we do. It's a matter of having enough packages and enough infrastructure to make that work. Yeah. So that still maintains a barrier to entry for us.
Absolutely. The ones with the larger network and the sort capability, right? That's where the barrier to entry becomes. It's just heavy capital investment necessary to be able to do that. You have a good understanding of center automation capabilities. You want to speak to what excites you right now? There is so much movement happening on that front. Your purview today is more commercial, but I'm pretty sure you look at that and go, if I was in that position, I would be doing A, B, and C. What excites you on the automation technology side as things are evolving fairly rapidly right now, probably faster than we have seen before?
No, that's true. I think when we started, we had on all of our hubs these line sorters. So they are workhorses that are very configurable. You just keep dropping more in place as you need them. That worked for us for a while, but we wanted to take extra steps out of the process and not have to do a 2-pass sort on machines. We moved to the larger loop sort type setups with cross-belt sorters, which was dazzling us. And we came from very humble beginnings and we're like, wow, we're in the big leagues now because we got a cross-belt sorter, 50,000 pieces per hour, which is impressive, but it's a very fixed machine. You depreciate something like that over 10 years or so, or maybe more, right? And so you're buying it, projecting out what you think the future is going to look like. I don't want to build a machine that handles today's capacity. I got to build a machine that handles 10 years from now capacity. We did many of those just before COVID and just after COVID. And guess how right our assumptions were, right? So it's tough to buy such a single piece, large scale machine you can't lift and shift it. So if you need to go to a bigger building or something, you can't just pick that thing up and unbolt it and put it in a new site. You got to scrap it, start over. So I think what's exciting is the flexibility part of things. And there's a lot of these robots that run on the stage and you can add size to the stage.
Cobots and AMRs.
Exactly. Yeah. That's pretty interesting because you can basically scale to the size you are now and keep scaling as you grow. And so we've reflected on our past with automation. And I think flexibility in terms of scaling up and down is a new variable that we hadn't considered before. Before it's like throughput, cost per piece, essentially, like once it's scaled. But before the COVID thinking wasn't like, well, what if we have to add 75% more throughput than we thought? Or what if the volume doesn't come and we don't want to be overspending CapEx? That's definitely a new variable. Being able to add and remove from automation is pretty interesting.
It's amazing. You think this back to normalization on the volume side is going to stay, right? That spike in COVID. I don't think I've spoken about COVID in a while at this point because everyone went through an adjustment phase. Do you think we are back to normal, right? Like other than some unseen effect comes in play in general?
We just went through a whiplash of tariffs, right? And so if Chinese goods cost 145%, I think that would have had a significant depression on the demand for anything. They can't switch production to other regions that fast. Our stuff would get way more expensive and that would reduce parcels in the networks. That goes back the other way.
This is the new normal, right? Keep guessing at this point. So, no, that's a really interesting call out.
Our CEO's motto right now is fast and flexible. And so we've been taking all of our actions to consider that. Don't take anything for granted of what you think the future is going to look like and be nimble.
Yeah, I agree. Just one thing to add on the USPS side, right? The rural delivery side, like their motto of delivering to Americas, and it's not a question. I'm just bringing this up because I was asking the question, be like, what's happening with drones, drone delivery stuff? And I would assume USPS in the game as well from a rural standpoint. And someone mentioned, wouldn't it be cool if a truck full of drones with deliveries just like parked on the side of a rural road and just flew out and did deliveries, and then another one comes and just puts it together. Now, that's a future I want to see from a last mile standpoint. Again, I'm not asking you about it, but general thoughts around innovation that goes beyond what we already do.
I love that everybody's experimenting in this space. And I think like having the freedom to do that without being too tied to the cost per piece is really important for the development of the industry. DHL has done a ton of work like that in Europe. They have parcel lockers. You stick your package in the parcel locker, a drone lands on top of the parcel locker, grabs the piece out of the parcel locker, takes off, goes to the other parcel locker. So really fascinating stuff that you don't know if it's going to pay back yet, but putting the time and thought and finding what the wrinkles are to then figure out what could work, really worthwhile doing. Now, I think we're far from that being the standard model. I go back to why do that if the postman's going to your house every day? But the concept of let's look and see other ways to do the same old thing is fascinating.
I think being on the like looking at financial side of that equation, I would say that the unit economics work out better to not have someone drive 20 minutes into a rural house deep into the woods. You know what I'm saying? And that's why rural opportunities are greater than the urban side when it comes to things of this nature. Hopefully, there are people doing the math. I don't know if innovation is something I would directly correlate to USPS at this point, but we'll wait and watch and see.
I think there's a lot that they work on in the background, decoupled from the core day to day, but there's a lot that they do that tries to move the ball forward.
Yeah. And again, I talk about it from a perception standpoint. I don't know all the details on that side. It would be very interesting.
Listen, we could take what we just talked about with disruption and competition and focus that on the commercial focus that you now have, Scott. There's a lot of competition. Everyone's forecast has been wrong on January 2nd over the past half decade. From a commercial side, you get these aggressive targets. You're going out, land and expand with existing clients. You're looking for new logos, and you've got disruption. You have inaccurate forecasts. You've got everything going on with just infrastructure of relationships with like USPS. So you have all that externally, but then internally, you've got ops and you've got sales and you've got tech and you've got finance. It'd be great to get some lessons learned or how you've figured out how to navigate those internal relationships and challenges to get everyone aligned and moving together on a straight line.
Yeah, it's a really important topic. And I think it's at the center of any organization's success to essentially align the teams towards a common goal and not stand for my incentive is counterposed from your incentive and we're going to fight to the death and see who wins. So, for example, when I first started in my first P&L type responsibility, or at least the operation side of the U.S. export business. We had trade lanes that we would export to. There was one person responsible for the last mile delivery partners in the countries abroad. There was one person responsible for customs clearance into those countries. There was one person responsible for air freight to get there, and one person responsible for handling locally. I'll take Australia as a great example. So we want to go to Australia. The cheapest way is to fly just to Sydney. Problem is, once you're there, you're trucking across a huge country, right, of line hauls and so So any last mile delivery partner's got a really high cost to deliver once you're in Australia. But if you fly to 4 cities in Australia spread across the country, your air freight's up, but your last mile is cheaper, right? And so you got to run this balance. And if you have a person that's sheltered within each function, they each want to please their boss and get their metrics cheaper. But what I did was reorganize it so that one person was responsible for Canada, one person for the UK, one person for Australia, et cetera, et cetera. They have to manage all parts of that supply chain and make that optimization so that their goal is to get the end-to-end as cheap as possible. The shift of how everyone's organized and what their targets are and making sure that the metrics are all within their full control makes a world of difference in terms of making good decisions and not things getting tripped up with differing incentives. So same thing in operations domestically. We have general managers in the field where they would get pushed on pieces per hour, essentially. Just drive pieces per hour. Someone else is going to make decisions for you on how much we're going to pay for labor. We're going to slap your hand when you have missorts or any other kinds of problems, but we're just going to grind you on pieces per hour. And sure enough, other things fall through the cracks. There's missorts. There's people who aren't attuned to that market making decisions about what we should pay in labor and what's the going rate in that market, or how much to spend and keeping folks happy with just events, pizza parties, recognition, that kind of stuff. We changed that around to say, a facility should have essentially, it's like shadow P&L. So you're going to get paid to sort a package effectively, and you're going to get charged when you do something like a missort or leave packages behind. Everything within there is up to you. How much do you want to pay folks? What do you want to invest in with those people? Do you put in extra quality checks on the floor to make sure you don't missort anything? Allow them to use their brains and treat it like their own business and not be too pigeonholed into one metric. That made a world of difference, boosted morale of the management teams dramatically. They felt like they actually could control their fate and you really get to see the creativity of the folks in the field. And now take it into the commercial and sales function. Probably the age-old dilemma is sales guys want revenue and pricing team is trying to protect gross profit. And that creates an animosity between the two teams. And that's not healthy either, right? But we're all here for the same reason, which is charge a fair price and really try to make the client successful. I'm in the process of starting to move the sales teams to look at GP as a factor. They're going to want the revenue for sure, but not be asking the pricing team to give it away at a huge loss. Starting to implement layers of that kind of thinking gets everybody on the same page, rowing in the same direction and boosts morale. Better decisions are made. I've taken that same approach of trusting people to use their brains because I think people are really smart if you give them the right incentives. And every chance I get, I'm looking for that angle to how to align.
And it's incentive misalignment, right? That specifically drives some of that. And again, that's going to naturally happen from each individual player's perspective. If I was to speak from one of your customers' side, you can see the brand trajectory or a retailer's trajectory and be able to forecast the volume. But many a times we have encountered where you have a big logistics organization that has always carried the customer shipping account. Specifically in the 3PL space, you are going to see for the 3PL starting off a new service and they have a promise on the volume side. As an example, it's, look, I am X, right? Probably similar to a DHL type organization that's going to be like, I'm starting this new e-commerce service. Today, I got zero volume. But given the investment I'm making, I should be able to get to 10 million parcels by the end of the year. You got to take that little bit of a chance on that side as well. And sometimes right, sometimes wrong. You have a perspective on that because we see that quite often.
Going back to the differing incentives, as a salesperson taking that story, going back to the pricing team and saying, give me great pricing because they're going to scale. Have they really vetted it? What is the technology they invested in? Is it real or is there really nothing there? Honestly, not that it matters that much. Once a package is in the network, the costs aren't that different. One of the big drivers is pickup. And if we give you a rate that's all baked in together, pickup plus the rest of the network and delivery, there's an assumption of how many packages are on that truck to divide out the costs, right? So we've taken bets. We'll say here, we're going to presume this much volume. We do in those cases then put a minimum monthly revenue in the contracts. If it doesn't show up, it's not that we're necessarily going to change the price, but contractually we could if it looks like this thing's stalled out and there's no reason for us to keep losing money on the account. It's more of an option to have that minimum in there. One thing I'm really pressing for in a lot of contracts now is to try to sell that pickup piece independently. So essentially a drop-off rate, in which case like you're like anybody else, a big account, small account, but I'm going to charge you X dollars per truck to just show up at your facility, it's on you to fill that thing. So that takes a lot of that differing incentive out of the picture.
I've seen DHL e-commerce be willing to place some of those bets. And I've seen you guys really get it right a couple of times too, where the payoff was double or triple what the forecast or projections were. You've got to vet it. You've got to see what's real. And when there's an opportunity to place a bet, I've seen you guys be very successful with whatever process you take to say yes or no to something like that.
Yeah. And it hinges on a really strong team to follow up in the background. Because I think the risk is that if you're too thin on your commercial team, then you make deals under some assumptions and then forget about it. And then all of a sudden you go back and look years later, how many $100,000 did we lose on this account because we weren't watching? And so having all the systems in place to really watch how's everything panning out compared to the plans and make adjustments as necessary just allows us to be aggressive more often because we can feel confident that we're not going to let it fall through the cracks.
I've led 3PL divisions where we partnered with DHL e-commerce, and I can vouch for your internal process where there was always a quarterly look at where we were compared to what we were forecasting. If we were off, what measures were we going to take? We would reforecast to make sure that the rates made sense and everybody was winning.
And we try not to be as dogmatic as if some of our competitors may be. If you fall below a threshold, then automatically your rates adjust. It's not the case with us. We're always going to have a discussion first and see what's it look like. Well, maybe we're okay with the accounts, even if it's less volume than we thought. It's only when we see that, hey, we're basically paying to ship your packages, that's when we got to do something.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And one more question from me on that side. I deal quite a lot on the side of normalization of data for pricing, like pricing in the sense like carrier A versus carrier B from a normalization standpoint. One of the things I do have to call out is there's simplicity in your pricing, right? Like relative to some of the other ones that I've seen, like how many little ticky-tacky stuff that might end up happening. Isn't that transparency from a cost perspective or the simplicity a competitive risk as well, because there is so much ticky-tackiness on the other side that I'm putting transparency in front of you so you know exactly what it's going to be versus all of this variability that could play out. I want your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And we stick with simplicity and transparency. It's easier to build a relationship with someone long-term that you're not sneaking in charges. We've had the most success from our longest relationships. And so that's very important to us. But you look back at competitive deals and they're like, all right, this is your target price. And you're like, wait a minute, does that have everything in the invoice? The fact that there are industries to help companies figure out what costs are coming to make an apples-to-apples comparison shows you that it's not that easy necessarily to make sure you are looking at comparable rates. So it's tough. The best we can do is try to communicate and urge prospective clients to thoroughly understand what may else be coming in that invoice. We're just not in a place where we think we need to play that game too. And we've done well enough with what we've got, and it's easy to explain. I certainly wouldn't want to be a sales rep getting a nasty call saying, what are all these charges? I think it's much easier to just explain, here's what's going to cost and build with them over time.
Something I just realized is holy bro, how is it in 2025? There is literally companies, and we know companies that are massive, their sole job is just auditing, and software firms that are doing that. How are we here today in 2025? That's just the invoice auditing part of your business, right? I'm sorry to say that's the part that hurts me right now.
Yeah, it does. But you come back to a low base rate gets attention. That gets a conversation started, and that's what they want. They want a chance, someone to answer their email or their cold call. And there's one way to do that, which is show a ridiculous low base rate that, doesn't include some things that should certainly be included.
AI needs to solve all of that.
Yeah.
Awesome, Scott. This has been an awesome session. Really appreciate you joining us. And before we wrap here, just want to give you the opportunity. Where could folks go to follow you on social? Where could they go to learn more about DHL e-commerce?
Yeah, you can Google us, DHL.com, find the links to our e-commerce page. We're out there. Give us a call and happy to help.
Appreciate it, Scott. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys.